She asked to see a necklace. The store manager refused and called the police instead. But when her father arrived, flashing his FBI badge, the entire room fell silent. Alyssa Monroe pulled open the heavy glass door of Hastings Fine Jewelry, stepping inside as a gust of air-conditioned coolness swept over her. The scent of polished mahogany and expensive perfume filled her nose. Under the bright showroom lights, rows of diamond rings, shimmering bracelets, and elegant gold chains sat encased in spotless glass displays. She hesitated for a second, smoothing her hoodie before making her way toward the jewelry counter. This place wasn't exactly welcoming, but she wasn't about to let that stop her. She had spent months saving up for this. Every dollar from babysitting gigs and weekend shifts at the local bookstore. Her mum deserved something beautiful, and Alyssa was determined to find it, but she could already feel the eyes on her. Across the room, behind a sleek marble counter, the store manager Deborah Langley took notice the second Alyssa walked in. A slight frown creased her face as she subtly nudged one of the younger sales associates. "Keep an eye on her," she muttered under her breath. Alyssa wasn't oblivious. She'd been through this routine before, polite smiles that didn't reach the eyes, employees watching her every move like she was a ticking time bomb. She could almost hear their unspoken thoughts. Does she even belong here? Can she afford anything? But she kept her head high and approached the counter with confidence. A well-dressed older couple browsed on one end of the display, whispering about a sapphire bracelet. They were greeted with warmth and enthusiasm. A teenage girl, not much older than Alyssa, giggled with her mum while trying on a delicate gold necklace. No one watched them with suspicion. Yet the moment Alyssa stopped in front of the glass case, the shift was palpable. Deborah's heels clicked against the floor as she approached. Her expression was composed, but there was something off about the way her eyes swept over Alyssa's casual outfit. "Can I help you find something specific?" she asked, her voice polite but clipped. Alyssa caught the pause, the hesitation in Deborah's tone that suggested maybe you shouldn't be here. She ignored it. "Yeah, I'm looking for a necklace for my mum's birthday." Deborah's lips pressed into a thin line. "I see. We carry a wide range of pieces. Some are quite expensive." There it was. The assumption. Alyssa bit back her irritation and leaned slightly over the glass, pointing at a delicate diamond pendant on a thin, white gold chain. "How much is this one?" Deborah didn't even glance down. Instead, she let out a small, almost amused huff. "That's a certified diamond pendant. It starts at $6,000. Alyssa met her gaze head-on. "Okay. Can I see it?" The response was subtle, but undeniable. Deborah didn't move. Her fingers twitched slightly as if debating whether it was even worth taking the necklace out. The silence stretched just a second too long before she finally reached for the keys at her waist. But before she could unlock the case, a hand on her arm stopped her. One of the other sales associates, a younger woman with sleek brown hair, leaned in and whispered something. Deborah nodded, her gaze flicking back to Alyssa. And just like that, she stepped away from the counter. "Excuse me for just a moment," Deborah said smoothly, already turning toward the register. But her real destination was the store phone. Alyssa watched as she picked up the receiver, her voice lowering to a hushed tone. The other employees didn't even try to hide it anymore. A man in a navy suit glanced up from behind the security desk. Another associate kept shifting from foot to foot, sneaking glances in her direction. Alyssa exhaled slowly. She'd only asked to see a necklace, yet somehow she had become a problem. But she had no idea just how far they were about to take it. Alyssa tried to keep her breathing steady as she glanced around the store. The same people who had barely noticed her a minute ago were suddenly hyper-aware of her presence. The older couple had stopped whispering about the sapphire bracelet. The teenage girl with the gold necklace shifted awkwardly, avoiding eye contact. The employees exchanged glances, moving with a kind of silent understanding, as if they all knew something she didn't. But she did know. Deborah Langley wasn't just taking a phone call, she was calling the police. Alyssa clenched her jaw, her hands tightening into fists at her sides. For what? She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't touched anything. She hadn't even pulled out her phone. Yet she was the one being treated like a criminal. Deborah's voice was too low for Alyssa to hear, but her stiff posture said enough. She spoke in clipped sentences, nodding along as if she were reporting something urgent. Then, after a final murmured exchange, She hung up and walked back with a practiced, pleasant smile. "Sorry about that," she said smoothly. "You were asking about the pendant." Alyssa didn't move. She could feel her heartbeat in her ears. "What did you just do?" Deborah's expression remained neutral, but her eyes flickered with something colder. "Excuse me." Alyssa's chest tightened. She was trapped in a game where the rules were rigged, where no matter how politely she spoke or how still she stood, she was already guilty in their eyes. "You called the police," she said, voice steady, despite the anger bubbling inside her. Deborah let out a small, practiced laugh, the kind meant to dismiss and disarm. "That's quite an accusation." Alyssa could see the way the other employees shifted uncomfortably. Even they knew this had crossed a line, and then the front door swung open. A uniformed police officer stepped inside, his hand resting on his belt. The room went silent. Alyssa felt something sharp lodge itself in her throat, but she forced herself to stand tall. The officer scanned the store before settling his gaze on Deborah, who immediately straightened with a relieved smile. "Officer, thank you for coming. We had a situation." The way she said it sent a shiver down Alyssa's spine. The officer nodded, then turned toward Alyssa. "Miss, I'm going to need to ask you a few questions." Alyssa swallowed the burning lump in her throat. She wasn't going to let them see her cry. "Why?" she asked, her voice firm. The officer's eyebrows furrowed slightly, as if this were a strange question. "We received a call about a suspicious individual." Alyssa let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. "I walked in. I asked to see a necklace." The officer glanced at Deborah, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. The message was clear. He turned back to Alyssa. "Do you have an ID on you?" Her hands shook as she reached for her phone. She knew what would happen next. She could already see how this was going to play out. A police officer questioning a 16-year-old girl in a jewelry store. She'd be asked to explain why she was there, what she was doing, if she could afford anything, and even if she answered everything perfectly, it might not be enough. Alyssa took a slow, steadying breath. "I want to call my father," she said. Deborah's face twitched, just barely, but Alyssa caught it. She didn't expect that. The officer hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "Go ahead." Alyssa's fingers moved quickly, dialing the familiar number. The moment the call connected, she didn't even wait for him to say hello. "Dad," she said, her voice tight, "I need you to come to Hastings Fine Jewelry. Right now." She could hear the shift in his tone immediately. "I'm on my way," he said, and then he hung up. But no one in that store was prepared for who was about to walk through that door. The silence in the store stretched thin, brittle like glass on the verge of cracking. The officer shifted his weight from one foot to the other, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Deborah stood tall, her carefully curated smile still plastered on her face, but something about her posture had changed. Stiff, uneasy. Alyssa, however, didn't move. She kept her eyes locked on the officer, refusing to look away, refusing to shrink. The front door chimed again. This time, when someone walked in, the energy in the room shifted so fast it was almost suffocating. A man in a dark, perfectly tailored suit stepped inside, his presence commanding even before he spoke. He wasn't overly tall, but he carried himself in a way that made him seem larger than life. His expression was unreadable, but his sharp eyes scanned the room with precision, locking onto every detail. The officer, the employees, the tension crackling in the air. Alyssa exhaled. "Dad?" Deborah's face paled slightly, but she recovered quickly, smoothing down the front of her blouse. "Sir, I'm—" The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather badge holder, flipping it open with practiced ease. The gold shield inside glinted under the showroom lights. FBI Director Nathaniel Monroe. The weight of the title settled over the store like a dense fog. The officer blinked. One of the sales associates let out a tiny gasp before quickly covering her mouth. "Deborah?" She went completely still. Nathaniel's voice was calm, controlled. "Someone want to explain to me why my 16-year-old daughter called me in distress from a jewelry store?" No one spoke. Alyssa felt a strange satisfaction watching the way Deborah struggled to form a response. The woman who had been so confident, so sure of herself just moments ago, now looked like she wanted to disappear. Finally, she cleared her throat. "Director Monroe, this is just a misunderstanding." Nathaniel's eyes flicked to the officer. You were called here for a suspicious individual. His voice didn't rise, but there was something cutting about the way he said it. Would you like to clarify what exactly made my daughter suspicious? The officer hesitated, glancing toward Deborah, but she said nothing. She was drowning now, and she knew it. Nathaniel's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. I want specifics, he said. Did she steal something? Was she causing a disturbance? Threatening anyone? The officer exhaled through his nose. He was trapped. No, sir. So let me get this straight. Nathaniel took a slow step forward, his badge still visible. A 16-year-old girl, shopping for a gift for her mother, asked to see a necklace, and instead of treating her like a customer, she was treated like a criminal. Deborah opened her mouth, closed it again. Alyssa could see it all happening behind her carefully maintained expression. The realization that there was no spinning this, no way to dig herself out of the hole she had so confidently thrown herself into. But Nathaniel wasn't done. Tell me, Miss Langley, he continued, voice still eerily even. Do you call the police on all your teenage customers? Or just the ones that look like my daughter? The words landed like a hammer. Alyssa held her breath. Deborah looked like she had been struck. That's not what happened. Nathaniel didn't blink. Then explain what did happen. The room was suffocating now, everyone waiting for her to speak, waiting for her to fix the mess she had created. But there was no fixing this. Because no matter what excuse she came up with, the truth was already out in the open. Deborah's throat bobbed as she swallowed hard, her hands twitching slightly at her sides. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. There was no rehearsed response for a situation like this. No corporate-approved script to smooth things over. Nathaniel Monroe stood in front of her, waiting, unmoving, unblinking. His presence wasn't loud, but it was impossible to ignore. Alyssa could see the thoughts racing through Deborah's head, trying to decide if she should double down or backtrack. She chose the latter. I sincerely apologize if there was any misunderstanding, Deborah finally said, her voice carefully measured. I was only acting in the best interest of the store. Nathaniel's expression didn't change. By assuming my daughter was a threat the moment she walked in, Deborah shifted, her fingers twisting together. I didn't assume anything. You just what? Nathaniel pressed. Deborah hesitated, and that second of silence sealed it. She had no real answer. Nathaniel exhaled, shaking his head slightly. People like you, he murmured, his voice softer now, but not weaker. You don't even realize the damage you cause. Deborah flinched like she had been slapped. Nathaniel turned to the officer. I assume there's no actual reason for you to be here? The officer's face was unreadable, but he gave a small shake of his head. No, sir. Then I'd suggest you leave before I start asking why taxpayer money is being wasted on personal bias. The officer stiffened slightly, then gave a curt nod and walked toward the exit. The sound of the door shutting behind him felt like a final verdict. Nathaniel looked back at Deborah, his gaze unwavering. I want your district manager's contact information. Deborah's face went white. Sir, Now! The authority in his voice left no room for argument. Slowly, stiffly, she reached under the counter, pulled out a business card, and handed it to him with shaking fingers. Nathaniel took it without another word, slipping it into his pocket. He didn't need to say what would come next. She knew. They all knew. The young sales associate, the one who had whispered to Deborah earlier, stood frozen behind the counter, eyes wide, cheeks flushed. Alyssa wondered if she regretted saying anything now. Nathaniel turned to Alyssa. You ready to go? Alyssa hesitated, then glanced at the pendant she had originally asked about. Nathaniel followed her gaze, then looked back at Deborah. She'll take the necklace. Deborah's lips parted slightly. Sir, You refused to show it to her before. Now you will. There was no negotiation in his tone. Deborah's hands trembled slightly as she unlocked the glass case and carefully pulled out the diamond pendant. She placed it on the counter, avoiding Alyssa's gaze entirely. Alyssa picked it up, rolling it between her fingers. It really was beautiful. Nathaniel pulled out his wallet and slid a platinum credit card across the counter. Charge it. Deborah barely managed to keep her hands steady as she processed the transaction. When she finally handed back the receipt, her fingers brushed against Nathaniel's, and she flinched as if burned. Nathaniel picked up the bag, handed it to Alyssa, and placed a firm hand on her shoulder. As they turned to leave, he paused just long enough to deliver one final quiet statement. "You should ask yourself if this is the legacy you want to leave behind." And with that, they walked out. But Alyssa wasn't done learning just how far the consequences of this moment would reach. The cool evening air hit Alyssa's face as she and her father stepped onto the sidewalk. The tension from inside the store still clung to her skin, thick and heavy, but she felt something else now too, something closer to relief. Nathaniel didn't speak right away. He simply walked beside her, his footsteps steady, measured. He had always been this way, letting silence fill the spaces where others would rush to speak. Alyssa turned the small shopping bag over in her hands. She had come in wanting to buy a gift, and she was leaving with it, but the entire experience had been tainted. The excitement was gone. The necklace didn't feel like a celebration anymore. She finally broke the silence. "You didn't have to buy it." Nathaniel glanced at her. "Yes, I did." Alyssa frowned. "Why?" He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Because I needed them to see that no matter what they assumed about you, you belong anywhere you choose to be." Alyssa swallowed hard, looking down at the bag. She wasn't sure if it made her feel better or worse. Nathaniel placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did everything right in there." She let out a small, breathy laugh. "Didn't feel like it. Because you were forced to prove something that should have never been questioned." She nodded, her fingers tightening around the handles of the bag. "I just don't get it." "I didn't do anything." Nathaniel exhaled, his gaze steady. "That's the part people like Deborah Langley will never admit. You didn't have to do anything. You just had to exist." Alyssa bit the inside of her cheek, trying to process the weight of that truth. They started walking again, but before they could reach the car, Nathaniel's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and let out a short, humorless chuckle. Alyssa raised an eyebrow. "What?" He turned the phone toward her. A notification from his FBI email was on the screen. The subject line was short, but it said everything. "Hastings, fine jewelry. Formal complaint received." Alyssa blinked. That was fast. Nathaniel slipped the phone back into his pocket. "Corporate doesn't like bad press, and they're about to get a lot of it." Alyssa hesitated, her mind spinning with the possibilities. "Do you think she'll get fired?" Nathaniel tilted his head. "Maybe, maybe not. But this will follow her." Alyssa thought about that, about how one moment could alter the course of someone's life, about how people like Deborah only seemed to realize their mistakes when they were forced to face them. She took a deep breath. "Good." Nathaniel gave her a small nod. "Come on, let's go home." As they climbed into the car, Alyssa felt something shift inside her. The anger was still there, simmering under the surface. But there was something else too. A kind of determination she hadn't felt before, because for the first time she understood that what happened in that store wasn't just about her. It was bigger than that, and she wasn't going to forget it. But what happened next would prove just how deep the ripples of this moment would go. Alyssa lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling, the events of the day playing on a loop in her mind. The cold stares, the hushed whispers, the way Deborah Langley had looked right through her, like she was nothing more than a problem that needed to be handled. She turned her head, her eyes landing on the small Hastings fine jewelry bag sitting on her desk. The pendant was still inside, untouched. She hadn't even taken it out since leaving the store. Her phone buzzed beside her. She reached for it and saw a message from her best friend, Tiana. "Tiana, girl, check your Twitter, now." Alyssa frowned, sitting up. She tapped open the app, and immediately her timeline exploded with posts about Hastings fine jewelry. Someone had posted a video. She clicked on it, and her own voice rang out from the screen. "You called the police." The clip showed the moment she confronted Deborah, the moment the officer walked in, the moment her father arrived and revealed who he was. The caption read, 16-year-old girl profiled at high-end jewelry store. Her dad is the FBI director. The store's manager? Speechless. Alyssa's stomach twisted. There were thousands of comments. Some people were outraged, demanding that Hastings fine jewelry fire Deborah immediately. Others defended the store, insisting there must be more to the story. She scrolled past news articles that had already been published. Hastings fine jewelry under fire after racial profiling incident. FBI director confronts store over treatment of his daughter. Luxury store faces backlash following viral video. Alyssa ran a hand down her face. This wasn't just a moment in a store anymore. It had become something bigger. Her door creaked open, and Nathaniel leaned against the frame. "You saw it?" Alyssa nodded slowly. "Yeah." He walked in, sitting at the edge of her bed. "How do you feel?" Alyssa let out a sharp exhale. "Exposed. I didn't think people would actually—" She gestured at her phone. "I mean, it's everywhere." Nathaniel studied her for a moment. "This isn't just about you anymore." She knew that. She could feel it. "It's weird," she admitted. "I wanted her to be held accountable, but now that it's actually happening, I don't know if I feel better." Nathaniel nodded, as if he understood that better than she did. Justice doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it just feels like weight. Alyssa let his words settle over her. The phone buzzed again. Another notification. This one from Hastings Fine Jewelry's official account. "We sincerely apologize for today's incident at our Oak Brook location. The actions taken by our store manager do not reflect our company's values. Effective immediately, she has been placed on administrative leave pending further review." Alyssa's fingers hovered over the screen. "I guess that's something," she murmured. Nathaniel didn't look at the phone. He looked at her. "This moment doesn't define you, but it will define her." Alyssa let out a slow breath. She reached for the Hastings bag, finally opening it. The pendant glinted under her bedroom light. For the first time, she really looked at it. She had bought this for her mother because she wanted to give her something beautiful. And now, somehow, it had become something else, a reminder of what people saw when they looked at her, of what she refused to let them define her by. Alyssa met her father's gaze. "I think I get it now." Nathaniel smiled, just slightly. "Good." She closed her fingers around the necklace, feeling its weight. This wasn't the ending. It was just the beginning. Some battles happen when you least expect them. Some lessons come at a cost. But when you stand your ground, when you refuse to be diminished, you don't just change your story. You change the way the world sees you. If this story resonated with you, let's keep the conversation going. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe for more stories that challenge, inspire, and make us think.